I didn't leave home like my father did. He disappeared in a storm of yelling and broken dishes when I was 12. One day he was standing in the living room screaming that he couldn't take it anymore, and the next, he was gone. No forwarding address. No goodbye note. Just a half-empty closet and a silence that stretched into years. When I left, I planned every step. No slammed doors, no drama. Just a quiet exit that would make it impossible for me to come back. I wanted it that way. I needed it that way. Because if I left any door open, any at all, I might feel the guilt creeping in. I couldn't let that happen. Not after everything. My name is Megan. I'm 35 now. 7 years ago, I walked away from the house I grew up in. I walked away from my brother Louis, who needed me more than anyone ever had. I walked away from my mother Debbie, who made sure I never forgot whose job it was to hold our crumbling family together after Dad left. I walked away from the life I never chose in the first place. Louis had been diagnosed with a rare neurological condition when he was 5. Something degenerative, incurable. By the time I turned 17, I was his full-time caregiver. I learned to change feeding tubes, measure out anti-seizure meds, handle his violent outbursts when he got overstimulated. I took classes online and dropped out of the last semester of high school to stay home. My mother didn't protest. She seemed relieved. Debbie was in her late 30s back then and acted like she was 20. She spent weekends at spas or at the beach with whatever 20-something guy she was stringing along at the time. On weekday mornings, I'd help Louis into his chair while she got ready for work, perfume clouding the hallway. "Don't wait up, babe," she'd sing on her way out the door. "You're doing such a great job with him. I'd be lost without you." As if those words were payment. As if her neglect could be wrapped up in a compliment and dismissed. She never once said thank you. In fact, she never did much at all. When Louis had a bad night, screaming, kicking, trying to claw his face, I'd be the one sitting up, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, calling emergency numbers when his breathing slowed. I kept records of his meds, managed doctor visits, and even dealt with social workers. Debbie would just smile and say, "Megan's got it all handled." And people believed her. I started planning my escape when I was 27. I knew I couldn't do it suddenly. If I walked out like Dad did, they'd trace me, pull me back in. I needed a plan so seamless it would leave no trace of who I was or where I went. For 2 years, I worked late nights at a 24-hour diner while Debbie thought I was just going to the library to get out of the house. I saved cash in an envelope hidden in the ceiling vent of the laundry room. Small bills, never deposited, never traceable. I applied for remote jobs under a fake name, built a new resume, and even paid a friend of a friend to create a new ID for me. Megan had to disappear completely. The hardest part was Louis. For all his struggles, he loved me. I was the only constant in his life. He'd smile when he heard my voice, even if he couldn't talk. He'd calm down when I was near, and sometimes he'd reach for my hand like it was the only lifeline he had left. The night before I left, he fell asleep gripping my wrist. I sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling and telling myself over and over, "This is the last time." I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I left a note in the drawer of my old desk. Not even a long one. Just, "Don't look for me. I'm gone." And I was. I moved to another state. Took a new name. Got a job editing marketing content for small businesses. I rented a tiny apartment with thin walls and peeling paint, but it was mine. No Louis. No Debbie. Just quiet. For years, I tried not to think about what I'd left behind. I buried it deep under routine and bills and pretending to be someone else. Until one day last summer, I got a message. Not to my phone, not to my email. Those had all changed. This came by letter. Handwritten. No return address. It said, "You're not as gone as you think you are." That one line. It shattered everything. I didn't know who sent it. I didn't know how they found me. But someone knew. Someone had dug through the walls I'd built, found the cracks, and slipped a hand through. I froze. That letter sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days before I finally burned it over the sink. 2 weeks later, another letter came. This one included a photo. Me, walking into my building with groceries. The back of the envelope just said, "Still think you're invisible?" I changed apartments the next day. It kept happening. Notes, photos, one time a USB drive with old voicemail clips from Louis, recordings I hadn't heard in years. He used to mumble sounds, almost like words, and I'd save the clips to my phone. I had deleted all of them before I left. Someone had them. And then came the worst one. A picture of Debbie, unconscious on the floor. Her arm was twisted unnaturally. A bruise circled her neck. On the back of the photo, "You left her too." I called the police anonymously. I told them to check the address. I didn't give my name. I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore. But when I found out that she had survived and claimed it was just a fall, I knew she was lying. Someone was hurting her to get to me. And then came the last letter. It was from Louis. Not handwritten. Typed. Short. Robotic, like someone was dictating it through a speech tool. It said, "Why did you leave me?" My chest caved in when I read that. I had told myself for years that he wouldn't understand. That he was too far gone. But someone had gotten to him. Coached him. Used him as bait. My guilt was a weapon now. And whoever this was, they knew exactly how to use it. I didn't respond. But I didn't sleep either. Every noise outside my window felt like a footstep. Every shadow in the hallway felt like a threat. I lived like that for months. Jumpy. Isolated. Until one day I got a call from a blocked number. The voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in over a decade. Meg. It's Dad. My stomach dropped. He said he had seen the letters too. That someone had been sending him copies. That he'd been living under a fake name too. That he had his own reasons for disappearing. I know what Debbie did to you, he said. I saw the reports. Social services closed the case before you turned 18. But I saw it. You were just a kid. And they made you a mother. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Then he said, I think Lewis is in danger. Real danger. And it's not from Debbie. That's where it stopped being a memory and became something else. Something real. Because now I knew. Someone wasn't just watching me. They were watching him too. And that was when I realized my guilt wasn't enough to keep me away anymore. I had to go back. Even if it meant becoming Megan again. Even if it meant seeing Debbie's face. Even if it meant facing Lewis after all these years. Because whatever was happening now, it wasn't over. Not even close. When I was 21, I got a full scholarship to a university in Washington. It wasn't just any school. It was one of those opportunities that come once in a lifetime. Prestigious, far from home, with a program in medical administration that I'd worked 2 years toward. The offer letter came in April. I still remember the feel of the envelope, the weight of it in my hand. For a few hours, I believed I had a way out. Then my mother found the letter. I hadn't hidden it. I was stupidly hopeful. I laid it on the kitchen table, thinking maybe, just maybe, she'd be proud. But when Debbie saw it, she didn't smile. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't say a word. She just stared at it with this cold, calculating stillness. That night, she came into my room, sat at the edge of my bed, and said, You think you're leaving? After everything I've done for you. I didn't answer. You abandoned Lewis, you're no better than your father, she hissed. You want to be like him? You want to walk out and never look back. She cried after that, the kind of tears that feel scripted. She talked about how hard things had been, how lonely she was, how scared she felt that I would just disappear. Then she said something that made my stomach turn. If you go, I don't know what might happen to me. I might not be able to handle it. And just like that, she flipped the guilt switch. I knew the language too well. She didn't threaten to hurt herself. She just painted the image, left it hanging. I was 21, and I let her break me with it. I turned the scholarship down. I told the university I had unforeseen family obligations. I lied and said I'd reapply next year. But I knew I never would. That fall, while my classmates moved into dorms and posted pictures of their new lives, I was back in that small beige room beside Lewis's, measuring crushed pills into applesauce and documenting the timing of every bowel movement. I kept a red notebook where I tracked his physical therapy, what medications were given when, what time he went to bed, whether he had seizures. No one asked me to. I just felt like I had to record everything. Like if I ever needed to prove something, prove that I was the one holding it all together, I'd have the data. Debbie spent most nights out. New boyfriend, Zane, 24 years old, worked at a vape shop. He moved in for a few weeks, stole some of my tip money from a coffee mug I kept on my dresser, then got caught trying to sell Debbie's old jewelry and vanished. Then there was Claudia, a social worker who showed up once every 3 months and asked the same routine questions. Is Lewis receiving proper care? Yes, I'd say. Do you feel supported as his caregiver? I'm managing. She'd check a few boxes, smile with tired eyes, and leave. I don't think she ever noticed the deep purple circles under mine. I was working part-time at a local hardware store, making just enough to pay for groceries and Lewis's incidentals, since Debbie kept claiming her money was tied up in bills. She got her nails done every other week and wore new shoes to brunch. I knew what her priorities were. One night, after Lewis had a violent episode, screaming, banging his head against the wall, frothing at the mouth, I sat beside his bed, arms aching, clothes stained with blood from where he bit through his lip. Debbie had gone out drinking again. I looked at my reflection in the dark TV screen and saw someone I didn't recognize. That night, I decided I was done playing along. The first thing I did was open a second bank account at a credit union one town over, under my full name but with a different address, one I found online for a closed-down hair salon. I told the clerk I was moving and didn't have a permanent address yet. He didn't ask further. I made a minimum deposit of $25. Next, I bought a burner phone for $120. Cheap, prepaid. I paid cash. I only turned it on in secret, late at night, with the ringer off. I set up a new email and started applying for jobs under a different name, Amaro, a name I pulled from an old novel on our bookshelf. After 2 months of searching and interviewing in stolen minutes, I found it, a remote transcription job for a medical software company in Arizona. Flexible hours. Triple the money I made at the store. They didn't ask for a video interview, just samples of typing speed and accuracy. I passed with ease. When they asked for ID, I gave them a scanned image of the fake driver's license a friend of mine from high school had made me years ago as a joke. Somehow it passed. For the first time in my life, I had my own money. Real money. I kept the store job just for cover, but most of my nights were now spent with my laptop on mute, typing up ER intake notes and medical dictation files while Lewis slept beside me. I got faster. I got smarter. I kept records of every payment, backed up my fake identity with social media profiles, created an alternate version of myself that looked believable. Emma liked coffee shops and posted quotes about resilience. Emma had opinions about hiking trails and gluten-free baking. The strange part was, I started to like Emma, but things at home didn't stop crumbling. Lewis's condition was getting worse. He'd have hallucinations, talk to shadows, scream at things that weren't there. Once, I woke up to find him in the hallway, eyes wide, bleeding from his palms after clawing at the walls. I begged Debbie to take him to a neurologist again. She said she couldn't afford another bill, so I took him myself. I used a fake Medicaid ID number I'd found online. Risky. Illegal. I didn't care. The doctor said Lewis might be showing early signs of frontal lobe deterioration. I asked if it could be stabilized. He said no, only managed. Then Debbie started dating a guy named Russell. Older, well-dressed, and eerily quiet. Something about him put me on edge. He never looked me in the eye. He'd just nod, mutter a greeting, and go into my mother's room for hours. I once heard shouting, a thud, and the next morning Debbie had a bruise on her collarbone. She told me she fell. Russell had a key to the house within a week. I started locking my door at night. One evening, I came home from the store to find him in the kitchen with a bottle of my anti-anxiety meds in his hand, the ones I'd hidden in the cereal box. He said nothing, just placed them on the table and left. That night, I moved the rest of my belongings into a single suitcase and slid it under my bed. Lewis began asking questions. Not verbally, but in his own way. He'd tap twice when he wanted me to stay longer in his room, pull at my sleeve when I turned to go. I think he knew. Somehow he knew I was planning something. One day, I found him curled on the floor with the corner of a picture frame in his hand. It was a photo of me holding him when he was a toddler. I hadn't seen that photo in years. He must have dug it out from the back of the hallway closet. He looked at me, and his lips formed the shape of my name, Meh. That's what he used to call me, back when he still had more language. I went into the bathroom and sobbed into a towel so he wouldn't hear. I didn't know what hurt more, that he still loved me, or that I couldn't save him. But I kept going. I started collecting more than just care records. I began photographing bruises on Debbie's arms. I documented medication gaps, behavior patterns, signs of negligence. I stored everything on a flash drive hidden in the panel beneath my bed. I told myself that if the day ever came when someone asked for proof, I'd have it. I even called Claudia once anonymously and told her to revisit the house. She did. Debbie cleaned up for the visit, made Lewis look presentable, dressed in a blouse. Claudia stayed 10 minutes and left. Nothing changed. Then came the most shocking moment of that year. I got an email from myself. From the old account I hadn't used in 2 years. The one tied to my real name. The subject line said, "You're not invisible." Inside was a single sentence. 2 people know. No attachment. No context. Just that. I checked the login activity. The account had been accessed from a nearby IP, less than 5 miles from our house. I deleted everything off that account and shut it down. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Someone knew. Someone was watching. I stayed up that night with a kitchen knife under my pillow. Lewis slept peacefully. I didn't. Because I realized then, I wasn't just hiding from the life I didn't want. I was hiding from people who had started to notice the cracks in the mask I wore. And one of them was inside our house. I knew I couldn't leave without a record. If I disappeared the way I planned, quiet, untraceable, someone might come for Lewis, and I didn't trust that he'd survive if left with Debbie. Even if I had to vanish for my own sanity, I needed to make sure I didn't vanish quietly. I started documenting everything. Not casually, methodically. Like building a case. Because that's exactly what I was doing. The first photo I took was of Lewis in his wheelchair, skin irritated and red around his thighs from sitting in the same spot too long. Debbie had been out for the weekend, partying with some new guy from Tampa named Milo. I was alone with Lewis again for 3 straight days. I cleaned him, fed him, managed his medications, did everything I always did, but I started adding timestamps. A photo of the date on the calendar. A screenshot of the time. Everything had to be provable. Then came the videos. I used my burner phone, Emma's phone. I recorded the bathroom after Debbie had left for the weekend. Soiled towels, empty bottles, no adult diapers in the cabinet because she forgot to pick them up. I filmed Lewis during one of his panic fits, shaking violently, gasping, while I tried to stabilize him. I created a new email address and began uploading copies to cloud storage under a random folder name, Textbook Notes 2020. I kept everything, the missed doctor appointments I had to reschedule, the calls where the clinic staff assumed I was Lewis's mother, not his sister. Debbie hadn't taken him to an appointment herself in over a year, but the insurance still listed her as his legal guardian. And that was when I started looking into the paperwork. I went into her bedroom when she was out one night and opened the fireproof box she kept in her closet. She thought I didn't know the combination. I did. It was Lewis's birthday. She was always predictable like that. Inside were tax documents, insurance statements, and Medicaid correspondence. I found records showing she had listed herself as Lewis's primary caregiver and claimed dependency benefits for both him and me well into my 20s. I printed everything I could, scanned it with a portable scanner I'd borrowed from work, and refiled the originals exactly as they were. That night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at my ceiling and thought, she's not just lazy, she's committing fraud. She had been receiving monthly caregiver payments, state money, disability compensation, and using it on herself. I recognized some of the expenses she had reported as medical equipment. They were purchases from fashion websites, bars, and hair salons. She even tried to write off a tattoo she got as a therapy-related expense. I felt sick, but I wasn't reckless. I knew I had one chance to do this right. So I researched attorneys who specialized in disability rights and caregiver fraud. After cross-checking dozens of sites, I found one. Josephine Granger, a small firm lawyer in her early 40s, known for taking tough cases involving medical guardianship abuse. Consultation, $250. I paid cash. Josephine met me in a public library conference room on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I gave her the documents, the files, everything I'd collected. She listened carefully, asking short, precise questions. Are you legally listed as a caregiver? Are you receiving any compensation? Is there anyone else involved in the care of your brother? She seemed disturbed by what I showed her, but also intrigued. Your mother has committed a felony, she said bluntly. This isn't just neglect. It's theft of government resources. I nodded. Can I file something anonymously? She raised an eyebrow. Not everything. But we can start with a social services complaint. I'll guide you through it. I know a contact in the county department. Her contact was a man named Omar Benton. Mid-50s, clean-cut, soft-spoken but sharp. He worked as a senior field officer in Adult Protective Services. Josephine set up a formal appointment between Omar and me, but under conditions. He couldn't share my identity with Debbie. I used Emma's ID, and he agreed not to reveal my real name in his notes. It wasn't standard procedure, but Josephine convinced him that I might be in danger if exposed. 2 weeks later, the inspection was approved. They didn't tell Debbie when they were coming. They never do. It happened on a Thursday morning while she was in the backyard having mimosas with her new friend Tessa, some influencer type with fake lashes and a vape pen permanently attached to her hand. Omar showed up with a clipboard, a badge, and a second woman, Lydia, a bilingual case officer who took notes and photographs. I watched from the hallway as Debbie tried to act confused. Inspection? What for? I wasn't notified. Lydia stayed silent while Omar walked through the house, opening cabinets, checking medication expiration dates, inspecting Lewis's room. Then he asked the bombshell question. Who is the primary caregiver for Lewis? Debbie smiled. I am. Omar looked at me. Lydia looked at her. They both already knew the answer. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Omar asked Debbie to describe Lewis's medications, dosage, and schedule. She froze. He takes that pink one in the morning, she said weakly. And then, the one for his, brain stuff. Omar nodded and wrote something down. Then he turned to me. Megan, can you describe Lewis's current prescriptions and administration times? I rattled off everything. Dosages. Side effects. What to look for in case of adverse reactions. I even pulled out the red notebook, flipping to this week's entries. Lydia's eyebrows lifted. Debbie's face flushed. But it got worse for her. Much worse. They asked her to produce the official guardianship paperwork. She fumbled through drawers. She found nothing. Because there was nothing to find. Turns out, Debbie had never formally filed for guardianship after our dad left. She had claimed dependency status on her taxes, registered as Lewis's guardian on Medicaid, but never went through the court process to make it legal. Which meant that everything she'd done, every benefit she'd received, was based on a lie. Omar and Lydia left that day with more than enough. They didn't say much on their way out, but I saw the weight in Omar's expression. He looked at me and said, "We'll be in touch. Soon." That night, Debbie lost it. She came into my room after midnight, reeking of wine. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. "What did you do?" she spat. "You little snake. You did this, didn't you?" I didn't answer. She stepped forward and for a moment, I thought she'd hit me. But she just pointed her finger, shaking. "I gave up everything for this family. Everything. And this is how you repay me." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the frame. I waited until she was asleep. Then I backed up the cloud drive again. 3 copies. 1 on the flash drive. 1 in my email. 1 on a private server Josephine had given me access to. The next morning, a different caseworker, Angela Novak, called me. She was with the state's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. Kind voice. Too kind. She said, "We've reviewed your files. You did the right thing. But this won't be easy." It never had been. Angela told me Debbie's case was now under official investigation. She couldn't disclose everything, but the words prosecution and benefit suspension came up more than once. What she did tell me was this: you're not legally bound to stay in that house. Those words stayed with me for days. They were like oxygen. I wasn't trapped. But I had to be careful. Because now, Debbie was dangerous. And I had made myself her enemy. After the inspection, things got worse. Debbie knew someone had turned her in, and she wasn't stupid, just unstable. She didn't confront me again directly, but the energy in the house shifted. Colder. Meaner. Everything she said now came out sharp. Her boyfriend Ron moved in 3 days later. Ron was a problem from the start. He was mid-40s, thick-necked, always in a black tank top no matter the weather. He worked nights in logistics, which I later figured out meant some low-rank warehouse job. He had a criminal record, misdemeanors, mostly drunk driving, resisting arrest. Debbie called him Ronnie, like he was her personal pit bull. The day he moved in, he rearranged the living room furniture without asking and said, "Finally, some goddamn order in this place." I stayed out of his way. But Lewis couldn't. Ron hated the noises Lewis made. His tics. The vocalizations. The coughing, the grunting. The way he'd flap his arms when overstimulated. Once I heard Ron mutter, "Why the hell can't he shut up?" when Lewis was having a tremor in the next room. That night, I searched online for hidden cameras. Not baby monitors, something discreet. Motion activated. Clear audio. I found one for $180. It looked like a regular wall charger, but had a lens embedded in it. I paid cash at a tech store 3 towns over. I installed it in the hallway, aimed at the entrance to Lewis's room. The first week, nothing major. The second week, I caught it. A recording of Debbie yelling at me, accusing me of poisoning her reputation, calling me a freeloading backstabber. It escalated quickly, her voice rising, her knocking over a glass. She got close to my face and hissed, "You think anyone's going to believe a pathetic caretaker with a fake job and no life?" I didn't say a word in the video. I just stood there frozen. The next clip was worse. Ron, drunk, yelling at Lewis from the doorway. "I told you to stop that noise." Lewis was stimmying, rocking back and forth in his bed. Ron threw something. It hit the wall, not him, but Lewis flinched and let out a strangled cry. That was the moment I knew I couldn't leave him behind. Not without putting something in motion first. The next day, I went back to Josephine. I showed her the clips. She watched without blinking, pausing occasionally to scribble notes. "You need to file for temporary custody," she said. "Today. But I don't have a place to take him." Then we specify a facility. A transitional center. Somewhere he can go while this is sorted out. She recommended a place called Marrow Ridge. A clinical care center 40 miles out of town that specialized in adults with progressive neurological conditions. They had a 24-hour medical team, sensory-safe rooms, and a behavioral therapy program. It wasn't permanent, but it was safe. I submitted the application that night. It required 2 witness statements, medical documentation, and proof of instability or danger in the current home. I had all of it. Josephine attached the audio files, the images, my notebook entries, and Lewis's medical chart with a statement from a nurse practitioner who had examined him during one of my solo appointments. The petition went through the county clerk within 3 days. I waited with my stomach in knots. While we waited for the judge's decision, I did something else. I applied to a temporary housing program for women in crisis. I found it through a local nonprofit, Reflex Shelter. It wasn't just for abuse survivors. It was for people like me, burned-out caretakers, displaced women, people with nowhere else to go but unwilling to stay in danger. The intake interview was done with a woman named Sheila, soft-voiced, with sad eyes that understood more than she said aloud. "I've been in houses like yours," she told me. "You're doing the right thing. And no, you don't need to have full custody for us to place you. If you have temporary custody, we can still help. 1 bed. That's all you'll need." She asked what my exit plan was. I didn't lie. "I don't know yet. But I'm building one." I packed my things into a suitcase I could carry on my own. Just one. I kept Lewis's essentials in a separate duffel bag. His medication planner, his chew sleeves, noise-canceling headphones, a plush blanket with a dinosaur print he'd loved since he was 10. On the 4th day, I got the call. The judge had approved temporary custody. 60 days with immediate placement allowed. The court official said the terms were clear. Lewis would be transferred to Marrow Ridge under my temporary guardianship. Debbie would be notified after the placement was secure. That night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and waited for sunrise. I scheduled the transport for the following afternoon. An unmarked van from Marrow Ridge. Medical staff inside. No sirens. No fanfare. At 3:40 p.m., they arrived. Lewis was calm when I explained it to him. I didn't lie. I told him I couldn't take care of him alone anymore, but I was making sure he was safe. He didn't fully understand, but he trusted me. He always had. He held my wrist while they wheeled him to the van. He didn't cry. I did. Debbie came home half an hour after they were gone. She noticed the silence. "Where is he?" I didn't answer. She stormed into his room, found it empty, and came back out wild-eyed. "What did you do?" "I filed for custody. He's in a medical center. A safe one. You think you can just steal my son? He's not your son. You never legally made him yours." She slapped me. It wasn't hard, not enough to bruise, but it was enough. I picked up my suitcase and walked out. I didn't say goodbye. When the court date was set, Josephine told me to be prepared for it to get ugly. "Family court isn't always about justice," she said. "It's about paperwork. About who looks more credible on paper." But I didn't just have paper. I had recordings, photos, witnesses. I had the truth, documented minute by minute. The hearing was scheduled in the Adams County Courthouse, 4th floor, room B12. Not a jury trial, just a judge, 2 attorneys, a clerk, and a cold room that smelled like air freshener and nerves. Debbie showed up in a gray blazer she'd probably borrowed. Ron came with her, in a wrinkled button-down shirt, arms crossed like he owned the place. I sat across from them with Josephine and Angela Novak, the Medicaid fraud caseworker. She agreed to attend the hearing voluntarily. I had never felt more exposed than I did when the bailiff called the room to order. The judge was a tall, gaunt man named Harold Meacham, known for being blunt and unsentimental. He looked over his glasses at the stack of documents Josephine placed on his desk. "Miss Nolan," he said, addressing Debbie by her legal name, "we have received significant material for review in this custody evaluation. Are you prepared to respond to the allegations?" Debbie stood, hands trembling just slightly. "Your Honor," All of this is a mistake. My daughter has a history of emotional issues. She's fabricated a narrative to make me look bad. I nearly laughed out loud. But Josephine placed a hand on my arm and whispered, "Let it ride." The judge flipped through the binder. "These are photographs of your son, Louis Nolan, taken over a 6-month span. They include evidence of untreated sores, irregular medication administration, and living conditions that, frankly, border on criminal neglect. Are you denying the validity of these photos?" Debbie stammered, I didn't know she was taking those. She's always trying to control everything. She makes things look worse than they are." Then the social worker testified. Omar Benton walked to the front of the room and calmly delivered his summary. "Your Honor, I conducted the unannounced welfare check in October. At that time, the child, pardon me, the adult dependent, was found in a state of neglect. The legal guardian, Miss Nolan, was unable to provide accurate medication information. The primary caregiving duties were being carried out by the petitioner, Miss Megan Nolan." He laid out the timeline with professional precision. Then he played 3 short audio clips, one of Debbie berating me, one of Ron yelling at Louis, and one of me quietly de-escalating a violent episode alone. The courtroom was dead silent. Then Angela stepped up and introduced the financial evidence. She passed the judge copies of Debbie's tax records, disability compensation filings, and Medicare statements. Miss Nolan received state funds designated for full-time caregiving. These were fraudulently claimed. Our office has opened a formal investigation into the misuse of public funds. As of today, all benefits have been frozen pending outcome. Debbie turned to Ron with wide, panicked eyes. He whispered something into her ear. She pulled away slightly, clearly rattled. The judge didn't need long to reach his decision. "Effective immediately," he announced, "Mr. Louis Nolan will be placed under the temporary guardianship of the Department of Protective Services in collaboration with Merrill Ridge Center." He paused, then looked directly at Debbie. "Miss Nolan, you are prohibited from initiating contact with Louis during the investigation. Furthermore, the court formally recommends criminal inquiry into your actions as a claimed legal guardian." Debbie opened her mouth, but Josephine raised her hand. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we also have a protection order request on file for Miss Megan Nolan and for Mr. Louis Nolan, based on continued harassment and verbal threats from the respondent's partner, Ron Davis." The judge reviewed it, nodded. "Granted." Then he looked at Ron. "Sir, you are named in 2 separate audio recordings as a perpetrator of verbal and emotional abuse, including an incident in which you allegedly threw an object at Mr. Nolan. Do you wish to respond?" Ron stood. "I didn't throw it at him. It was at the wall." "Is that supposed to make it better?" the judge asked coldly. "You are under investigation for domestic violence. Bailiff, please detain Mr. Davis for processing." Ron exploded. "This is I didn't even touch the kid." 2 bailiffs flanked him before he could get to the bench. One had his arm around Ron's shoulder, the other grabbed his wrists and cuffed him. He kept shouting as they dragged him out. "Debbie, say something. You gonna let them do this?" She didn't look at him. She couldn't even look at me. When the judge dismissed the court, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, control. Outside the courtroom, Josephine turned to me and said, "You did it. You protected him." But I wasn't crying from relief. I was shaking from the aftershock. It was over. At least for now. Back at the shelter, Sheila was waiting with an open door and a calm smile. "You're not just safe," she said. "You're protected." That's a big difference. I nodded and walked in. Not because I was sure, but because for the first time in a long time I had options. And for now, that was enough. Louise was transferred to Merrill Ridge 2 days after the court hearing. It was quiet, efficient, and handled with more dignity than I expected. The center sent 2 transportation aides and a nurse. They arrived in navy blue scrubs and called him Mr. Nolan with respectful smiles. When I wheeled him out to the van, he looked confused, but not scared. He kept his eyes on me the whole time. The facility itself was like another world. Wide, bright halls with natural light. Calming earth tone colors. No fluorescent flickering. No overbearing institutional smell. His room had a bed by the window, shelves for personal items, and a mounted TV that could be voice activated. They allowed me to bring his dinosaur blanket and his headphones, and the nurse, a tall woman named Soraya, let me help him set them up. "He'll have one-on-one sessions with a neuropsych specialist twice a week," she said, "plus assisted physical therapy, 3 meals a day, and a nurse within 30 seconds of any call button. We're also trauma-informed, so if there are any signs of stress or flashbacks, he won't be ignored." I wanted to cry and sleep for a week at the same time. Before I left, I sat with Luis and showed him how the call remote worked. I labeled the buttons with stickers: green for nurse, red for emergencies, blue for food. He watched me with the same tired eyes he'd had since we were kids, but when I pressed his hand to say goodbye, he squeezed once, tightly. He understood. That night, I went back to Reflex Shelter and unpacked for the last time. Sheila met me in the hallway. "You got a place?" she asked. "Found a studio. Midtown. Lease starts next week." Her smile reached her eyes this time. "Good. Let the world grow quiet for a bit." I did. The apartment was small but clean. 1 room, a kitchenette, a tiny bathroom, and a narrow window that faced an alley full of pigeons and dumpsters. But it was mine. The rent was $1,350, more than I'd ever paid for anything, but I was finally making enough to handle it. I'd accepted a full-time offer from the transcription company I'd freelanced for. Benefits. Vacation time. Health insurance. I signed the papers under my real name. No more MRO. I was done hiding. My official title was Healthcare Documentation Specialist. Remote. Steady hours, 2 15-minute breaks, and 1 hour-long lunch. It felt like climbing into a life I didn't have to apologize for. I bought a secondhand couch for $80 and dragged it in myself. A desk from a garage sale. A lamp from someone's curb. I ordered blackout curtains online. I kept my walls bare for now. I didn't want to decorate until I felt like I could stay. The first paycheck came with a benefits package brochure. I stared at the section titled Employee Wellness and Mental Health Resources for a full hour before I called the number. The therapist assigned to me was named Faye, late 30s, gentle voice, no judgment in her tone. During our second session, I told her I'd been a full-time caretaker since I was 17. She didn't say wow or you poor thing. She just asked me what I liked to do when I wasn't surviving. I didn't have an answer. The next week, I bought a watercolor set from a dollar store. I hadn't painted since middle school. It felt childish and pointless at first. But slowly, over evenings filled with silence and tea, I began to sketch shapes and colors that didn't ask anything of me. 3 weeks after Luis's transfer, I got a call from Merrow Ridge. It was Nurse Soraya again. I just wanted to let you know, she said, Luis asked for his sister today. With words. I froze. What did he say? He said, Megan. Soft, but clear. Right before bed. I hung up and cried in my bathroom with the faucet running. He was healing. In a way that was only possible because I'd stepped away. A few days later, I got an email from my cousin Amy. The subject line said, "Can we talk?" Amy was Debbie's niece, 10 years older than me, had always lived across the state, married with kids. She used to call me every few months out of obligation. But after Debbie started spreading lies about me, saying I'd stolen Luis, that I'd manipulated the system, Amy ghosted me. Now, she was reaching out. I hesitated, then replied. We met at a cafe in the Arts District. She was already sitting with a latte, no makeup, looking older than I remembered. I need to say something first, she said. I'm sorry. I believed Aunt Debbie. I thought you were being dramatic. You always seemed so in control, and she was so convincing. I stared at her for a moment. Then I pulled out my phone and played a short clip, the audio of Ron shouting at Luis, Debbie laughing in the background. Amy's face crumpled. Oh my God, she whispered. She said you were exaggerating. That you were paranoid. That you were trying to cut her off for your own gain. She used Luis like a tool, I said. And the system let her. For years. Amy nodded slowly. I want to help. I didn't say anything. I applied to be a volunteer at Merrow Ridge, she added. I just started. I help with group activities twice a week. That was when I saw it. Real remorse. Real shame. I didn't trust her completely. Not yet. But I respected the fact that she wasn't just saying sorry. She was showing up. That same week, another relative reached out. Uncle Theo, my dad's younger brother. He left a voicemail saying he'd heard some of the truth and wanted to apologize for keeping his distance. I didn't call back. Maybe someday. But not now. The center allowed me 2 visits per week with Luis. Every time I came, they brought him into the sunroom where the windows overlooked a quiet garden with a koi pond. He liked to sit near the glass and watch the fish. He didn't say much, but he reached for my hand each time. And each time, I let him hold it. No questions. No guilt. Just presence. One of the nurses told me he'd started sleeping better. Eating more. Responding positively to sensory therapy. They were even introducing a speech device, something that could allow him to form phrases. On my 4th visit, he used it for the first time. The machine said, I feel good. That was it. 3 words. I wrote them down in the red notebook I still carried. Not because I needed to track them, but because they were the first thing I'd ever heard from him that was completely voluntary, clear, and free. He was beginning to become someone outside of survival. And so was I. The first time Luis smiled at me, I wasn't even sure I'd seen it right. It was small. Just the corners of his mouth lifting, his eyes focused on mine. But it was real. Soraya confirmed it later when I asked. Yes, she said. He smiled at you. I sat in the hallway afterward and cried into my sleeve. It started slowly. Just moments of clarity. Luis looking at something with interest, tracking motion more consistently, humming in a pattern when he was calm. Then came the tablet. It was a sleek, lightweight communication device, funded through the center's assistive tech grant program. It had large, colorful icons and categories like feelings, needs, wants, people. At first, he just tapped them randomly. The staff encouraged him to use it with a speech therapist named Micah, who had a background in neurodegenerative disorders. Micah was soft-spoken and patient. About my age, maybe a little younger. He wore mismatched socks and carried a tiny rubber sloth keychain on his bag. For some reason, Luis liked him immediately. The first week with the tablet, Luis tapped out music 4 times in one session. Micah played a soft piano piece on his phone, and Luis tapped more. It was like watching a door open. Drawing came next. They set up a whiteboard and dry erase markers in the art therapy room. Luis started making shapes, circles, mostly. Then uneven spirals. Then something unmistakable. A stick figure with long hair next to a smaller one in a wheelchair. He tapped sister on his tablet when I asked him about it. From that point on, he began requesting our visits. Every week, I'd walk into the sunroom and find him already wheeled into place, tablet in his lap, smiling faintly like he'd known all day I was coming. The staff updated me weekly. Luis was attending all scheduled therapies. He'd begun sleeping through the night. No more waking up screaming. No more unexplained bruises from hitting himself. They added gentle stretching exercises to his routine. His appetite had improved. He was responding to 3 basic commands and initiating choices in his tablet without prompting. He's coming back to life, Micah told me once. Not fast, but definitely. That was around the time I began to consider school again. I'd spent so many years as a caregiver that it felt like a second skin. But now, for the first time, I was seeing what real professional caregiving could do. I wanted in, not just as a sister or survivor, but as someone who could be part of that world with credentials and backing. Josephine had told me about the Adult Opportunity Grant months ago, back when she helped me get custody. It was a state-funded program for people aged 25 and older who'd experienced long-term family hardship, caregiving burdens, or system failure. I applied on a rainy afternoon, half sure I'd be denied. I wasn't. 3 weeks later, I received a full tuition voucher for a 2-year online program in occupational therapy assistance through Westgate Technical College. Flexible schedule, remote coursework, in-person practicums optional depending on location. Everything fit. I started classes in March. The first semester was overwhelming. Anatomy modules, neurology basics, ethics in rehabilitation. But I thrived in it. My experience with Luis wasn't just useful, it gave me an edge. I could answer case studies with examples from real life. When an assignment asked for examples of sensory integration strategies for nonverbal patients, I wrote about the dinosaur blanket and Luis's favorite smell, orange peel. I hadn't felt pride in years. But this felt right. By April, I'd fallen into a rhythm. Morning check-ins with my remote job, 2 hours of coursework, lunch, another block of work, then my visits with Luis in the evenings. Sometimes I studied while he drew. He'd glance over at my screen and smile when he saw anatomy charts. Once he tapped school on his tablet and pointed at me. Yes, I said. I'm learning how to help people like you. He grinned. May brought his birthday. He was 24. I asked the center if we could host something small. Nothing fancy. Just cake, music, maybe balloons. They agreed. Amy helped set up the room, brought cupcakes with dinosaur toppers and green napkins. I brought a framed picture, us when we were kids, sitting on the porch with ice cream in hand. I showed it to him before we started the music. He tapped me, then sister, then home. The staff gave him a soft dinosaur plush that squeaked when pressed. He laughed. After cake, I handed him the tablet again. He tapped slowly, thank you. I felt like I was floating. Not just because he said it, but because he chose it. Unprompted. On his own. I took a photo of us together at the party, me kneeling beside him, Luis holding the dinosaur plush, both of us smiling. I printed it and hung it in my apartment that same night, right above my desk where I studied. Every time I saw it, I remembered that for years. I thought I'd never see him smile again. But here he was, smiling, drawing, saying thank you. Living. And I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming someone. Not just for him, but for myself too.